Welcome to a Prevent Connect podcast, where we explore the prevention of violence against women. This is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
So a lot of energy. What was it like having that discussion? It was short, right? I felt rude interrupting you because you guys looked like you were really into it, right? So it was short. That leads me to believe that it was something that you found somehow it was pleasurable or something you were getting out of it, right? What else? What else did you notice as you had that conversation? You moved. I'm like an auctioneer. You move, you're on. Anyone else? What else did you notice? Yes. Yes. Okay. That it's not a simple, the answer, especially I imagine, is to the second. It's not simple, right? It's not simple. It's complicated. What else? What else did you notice? Yeah.
That we had three groups, and we were all from like pretty much three different generations. So it's intergenerational work.
Yes, so really noticing the years, right? That it's intergenerational, and that's exciting, and it also sometimes causes challenges, right? Mm-hmm. Intergenerational. What else popped out for you as you had this conversation? What else did you notice? Yes. Hold on. Sorry. Really important. She just said we had a man in our group. Really important, right? That it's not, you know, I think in the beginning it was mostly what? Women involved, and that's slowly changing, and I think it's really necessary, right? So noticing that this is really a movement that has been happening for a while, that there's a lot of different aspects or different features, a lot of different people involved. And what we're going to do is really take a look at, first, the history, a little bit of the history of sexual violence work or the field, and then take a look at this idea of doing community level prevention. It's not necessarily shifting. I almost think of it as like adding another layer. And what does that mean as people try to shift from whatever work they're accustomed to doing to that layer, that type of work? Okay? I have the mic, but I like the mic. No, go.
Okay, so as Grisel said, we're just going to talk a little bit about the history of the work related to sexual violence in the United States. And a lot of you are already working in the field, so you probably already know a lot of this, but we just wanted to be able to highlight some of the important key pivotal moments. So we are going to go through this decade by decade very quickly, and I'm just going to start off with before the 1970s. So in the 1800s, we start to see the earliest organized anti-rape efforts evolving from the anti-slavery movement. It was really starting to bring awareness to a lot of the powerlessness and silencing of women, even in their contributions to the anti-slavery movement. And then also in the 1960s, we know the Memphis riots occurred, and at that time, a group of Black women, one of the first women to testify before Congress about being raped by a group of white men. And then also there's other pivotal cases during that time, such as Missouri versus Celia of 1885. But then we start to see in the 1800s the women's feminist movement, as well as the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And during that time, it's a lot of conversations occurring surrounding injustice, institutionalized violence, and equal rights, which was not only important for African American rights, but for women's rights. In the 1970s, we really start to see this grassroots battered women's justice movement start to spread. And during this time, it included a lot of elements of the anti-rape movement as well as domestic violence. We start to see a lot of our earliest rape crisis centers being established in major cities such as Chicago and Philly and DC. And also, we see that the UN adopts the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which was basically like this internal treaty that served, which was sometimes described as an international Bill of Rights for women. Between 1980 and 1990, we see the anti-rape movement start to spread to universities and other academic institutions. And we also see that a lot of these rape crisis centers that were established in the earlier decade, they begin to join together to create state coalitions. And in this time also, we start to see this increase in public interest and conversation around sexual violence, around the anti-rape movement, but it also included an increase in the backlash against survivors and advocates. 1990 to 2000, we see Congress pass the Clery Act, as well as the Violence Against Women Act. And we also see the World Health Organization declare intimate partner violence and sexual violence as global public health problems. And this is really significant because it starts to change the way that we all talk about sexual violence and sexual violence prevention, not only in the United States, but across the world. 2000 and 2010, the Violence Against Women Act 2 was passed, and this was significant, especially for our rape prevention education programs, because this was the time that we started to see funding come in to all 50 states and U.S. territories from the federal funding of the rape prevention and education program. And we also see the 2011, we all know the Department of Education, or the Obama administration, released the Dear Colleague letter. In 2016 to 2018, till present, we see more of these high-profile cases: Brock Turner, Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, and we also see the revitalization of the #MeToo movement. As well as so many viral social media campaigns that are bringing national attention to sexual violence. So as we look at all of these sort of pivotal moments, and I'm sure there's a whole lot more, but to be brief here, we start to see that there's several different things happening. There's several different shifts that were happening. One of them, I would say, is in the years ago, was a heavy focus on individual level work, and we are slowly moving towards more focus on community level work. We also see in a minute way the terms change. At one point it was the anti-rape movement, and now it's sexual violence and sexual violence prevention, which encompasses a lot of the different issues that we see. It's not just rape, it's sexual harassment, sexual assault. And then also we see, like Gracel said, building on this layer of community level prevention where the work is still grassroots and still local, but also starting to incorporate a lot of the policy change and the social norms change that we need. So now.
It only works if it's a swelling from the community. It oftentimes requires work happening beforehand in order for it to be effective. Right? So for example, you may or may not know this, or I've heard of this, but Bloomberg, one of the mayors of New York City, at one point put some kind of rules or policies around how big a thing of soda could be, right? And people went crazy. You're controlling our soda, right? Why? Because there was no swelling. There was no interest from the community. There was no work done from the community. He just came and plopped that on top of folks, right? So in order for community level prevention to work, it has to be from a movement. It has to be something that's been going on. In tobacco, it was something that was happening and then went to this sort of like, how can we impact the community at large, right? So it's part of the work that has already been happening. It's a key part of it. And that work, that advocacy and that response work has to continue happening while this next layer happens. Does that make sense the way I'm saying it? Okay. So let's take a look at what are we talking about when we say what is community prevention. This was a video that we sort of put for folks in a training. We thought it was much more interesting than us just talking. prevention is everything that you guys mentioned, right? It's this idea, individual level, if you think about individual level prevention, how would you define that? Individual level prevention is what?
It's like giving a presentation to change that individual's attitude.
Nice. It's really focused on the individual. I'm going to change you, and oftentimes it's done in classrooms and things like that, right? But the idea is I'm changing the individuals, right? So I'm doing things to change these individuals, the way they think, the way they understand the world, so on and so forth, right? Community level prevention is really looking at how can we change the community. So you guys said it, the culture, the social norms that impact that behavior, right? And it's based on this concept that our environment impact how we behave. So how many of you believe in that or agree with that? Our environment impacts the way we behave, right? So then how do we so in theory, we all are in agreement with community level prevention, right? Why the focus on community level prevention? Why is there so much focus on, okay, some people do individual level, but we want more of our prevention to be community level instead of individual level? Why? No, please, yeah.
Theoretically, if we change the environment, because we're talking about learned behaviors, so if we can impact change within the environment, then we can impact change at the individual level. But it's not, it's a collective process. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. So theoretically, if we change the environment, we can change the individual. But why not just keep working individually? We're really good at that. We've been doing it. Why not just keep doing it individually? And someone said it, so, oh, the mic.
No, I was going to say it takes a lot more time, focus, and energy to educate an individual rather than a community. And then by that time, I feel like the education will be lost, and you have to start over again with one other person, and it's a...
Thank you. So it's not... Go ahead, you were going to say something.
When you work with an individual and then you send them kind of back out into the community where nothing has changed within the community, it's only making a difference for that one person, which is huge to make that difference for that one person, but they're being sent out to where everything else is not what they just learned.
Right? Thank you. Did you want to add? So it's exactly what you guys, first of all, if we were to change every individual, so if I do community level prevention, the idea is I do something that impacts this whole side of the room. So all of you are on board, right? Not every single person, but a lot of you, right? If I do individual on this side, that means I have to run around to each one of you, and we do presentations which really help. So I'm not taking away from that, but still be presentation here, presentation there, right? Which is more challenging. And then the interesting thing is that then these individuals will go back into the community that doesn't support that behavior. Right? So it takes a lot more work because now you got to convince them, no, go ahead, do it anyway. Right? It's a lot more work. So the idea of community level prevention is a strategy or an approach that will be more effective, hopefully, more bang for your buck. I don't know if that's a good expression, but it's the only one that comes into my mind, right? And more sustainable. And it also, at the end, is less work for the individuals doing the work. In the beginning, I think it's a lot more challenging, right? But at the end, it's less work. Okay, and we think of the example of tobacco, because the population-based or community-level work was done in tobacco. I don't know about where you're from, but in New York City, people used to smoke in the street like nothing, right? Everyone was smoking in the street. Now you see them in front of the buildings, and it's very different. They're sitting there like this. Like they're almost, I feel badly, they're almost ashamed to smoke, right? But it changed the norm. So that's the idea. Community level prevention is really about trying to change the norms and trying to do it quickly with large groups of people, one at a time, right? Okay, so we're all in agreement that that's a good idea, true or false? Okay, what could be challenging about doing that work? What could, because, you know, it's cute in theory, But I'm always like, theory's nice, we're in the real world, right? What can be challenging about doing that work? Yes.
You have to have a lot of.
Sorry, y'all. Can everyone use the microphone? Just be sure to do that for accessibility reasons. Thank you.
I think you have to have buy-in at so many different levels of the community, especially kind of high-level stakeholders that have the ability to kind of shut something down very quickly. And so that's a challenge is the year, like you said at the beginning, like it takes so much work at the beginning because of the need for relationship building.
Nice.
And establishing buy-in.
Nice. So you have to get buy-in, and you have to get buy-in from the right people, right? You have to get buy-in from everyone in the community. I love someone said, buy the community for it, right? So you have to get buy-in from everyone, and yet there are some decision makers and some stakeholders that are going to make your life a lot harder if you don't get buy-in from them, right? So you have to get buy-in. What else?
I think for many, it involves another skill level, knowledge level, comfort level in terms of going in and talking to a different group versus doing a presentation or educational workshop.
Yes, absolutely. It requires a different skill set. We joked about it. It's almost like you're selling to some extent, right? And you have to be able to talk non-traditional partners, so that requires a different skill set. Nice. Others. Let's go. Actually, let me go back here so we're not, and then we'll come up here.
From the perspective of reporting out data, your data look different over different periods of time. So if you were doing individual for a while and now we're transitioning, you have to be able to explain that up to your funders.
Yes. And when you get funded, you have to, show, right? So, yes, so sort of reporting, data, evaluating, it's not the way we're traditionally accustomed to doing it. So then how do you do it so it really represents the work you're doing, right? Others. So your hand up and then.
Resistance from people who are afraid of change.
Resistance, change is challenging for all of us. So resistance from people that are human, because really it can be from anyone, right? Including us. Including us. In theory, we may think it's a wonderful idea, and then when you're like, okay, you have to do this, you have to do that, we're like, that's not the way I like to do it, right? That feels uncomfortable, right? Others, here and then there.
Defining community?
Thank you. Defining community. What is it? Are we talking about the whole United States in one shot, or what are we talking about here?
Well, you have to create relationships among other larger organizations, and sometimes those nonprofits see you as a threat to their piece of the pie.
Nice. So creating relationships, and I love what you said, because sometimes people are like, no, that's my piece, right? What are you trying to take away my money or my population over here, and then we'll go there.
So what you see today may not be the same in a year, so you always have to kind of keep evolving, keep redefining.
Nice. So part of it is planning for sustainability, planning for changes. Communities don't stay the same, so how do you address that? And I know you had your hand up.
So also, to take a step backwards, when it comes to things of privilege and power in general, people don't want to change systems that benefit them, right?
Nice. So a lot of this is looking at policies and systems, and then you get into this business about, well, who is it benefiting, who is it not, what's my perception of it? I may not think it's a problem, right? And now, what does that mean? How do we work through that? Nice. Okay, one more, and then we're going to sort of move on.
It's kind of the classic thing that you can't make someone change unless they want to change. So sort of similarly on the community level, you can't be the only one that cares or wants this because it takes a lot of work.
Yeah, so how do you mobilize and how do you motivate people to want to do this work? And we're going to talk in a minute about what that means, right? But how do you motivate them to do this work? So you guys just identify all the challenges, I think. So absolutely. So let's talk about the challenges we saw in New York State, which really sort of resemble what you're saying, and then talk about what our approach was.
A lot of, like Chriselle said, a lot of the challenges that you guys have just identified are some of the exact same ones that we have encountered with our New York State RPE program. And so and definitely as we are trying to make a shift of keeping the individual level grassroots work that is going on, but adding the community level prevention component to it. And so one of the first things that I think that we had to look at is identifying and having discussions with our providers that community level prevention is new. Well, in sexual violence, it's new. It's this relatively new concept that has existed in other fields, like Gracel said, in tobacco prevention and diabetes prevention. But for sexual violence, this is a pretty new topic. And therefore, because it's so new for us, there's this level of trial and error. And that is really scary for a lot of us. That there's no set of guidelines, there's no practice guide that we can look at to just follow what somebody else did and do it for ourselves and have these great positive outcomes and all the data that we need to be able to show our funders. So when we think about trial and error, we just have to make sure that when we're looking at the different programs and activities and interventions that our providers and our communities are working on, we just have to make sure that the work actually fits into practice, that it fits the community, that it fits what we're trying to do. And if it doesn't, and this is where the trial and error part comes in, be willing and open to make the change. Look at it strategically and then make some changes to the work so that it can really fit your community and you can really do what you set forth to do.
Yes, and going off that, a second lesson that we have learned over the course of these 5 years is that it's hard to know what community level prevention really looks like. So we have some of these guidance documents. How many people here are familiar with the CDC Stop SV technical package? So quite a few of you. So we have some of these ideas of definitions online that we can Google, but what does that look like on the day-to-day when we're actually doing the work? And also when we read these documents, we can get confused over terms. I've talked to a lot of people who think that community level prevention is working in the community. And that can be part of it, but sometimes working in the community, you're doing that at an individual level. So I'm going into the community and talking to people, which is a great thing to do, but it's not necessarily this community level strategy where we're talking about an intervention in the community. So there's some terms that can be confusing. We also throw around the term of social norms, which I think a lot of people talk about rape culture and we want to impact social norms and toxic masculinity, but what does that look like? What does that mean when we're out there in the community doing work? So there was a need to better define it. And then someone over here brought up this idea of skills. There are new skills. I thought that was really apt who said that earlier, because it was something that we have been grappling with throughout this project, is what are the skills you really need to do community level work? When I started working in sexual violence prevention, I was a counselor and I worked individually with people and ran groups. And those are really crucial skills that we need, but they're also very different from engaging leadership or systematically implementing an intervention or some of the more macro things that we think about. They're really different, and we can't expect people to just start doing that. So if we're in an organization and we're looking to do a community level approach, we have to think about what skills that we have to build. And then one of the last lessons learned, although there were a lot, but we're summarizing some of the things that sort of shaped our approach, was how do we be realistic about this? And I think that's something that at every workshop you think about, because people in this room and people at this conference are people that want to change the world, and we want to do everything, we want to do it all the time, but we can't. A lot of times we have limited resources and limited staff. So we work in New York State where we have 6 regional centers. And in each regional center, they're spearheaded by one regional coordinator, and then they'll have a few support staff. Maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3, if you're lucky 5. So 5 people at the most working in an entire region in New York State to try to do community level prevention. it's not possible to do everything. So we had to think about what can we do? What's realistic with our time and our resources so that we can really make an impact. So with these lessons learned, we developed, along with our regions and the Department of Health, an approach that Grisel is going to talk about.
So first thing about the approach is that it has to be collaborative. So we have one person from our region here, more than one. But we really worked with the regional centers to listen, because they're the ones out there doing the work, right? So it's really important to listen to them and to hear what's working, what's not working, what's challenging, you know, what they need in terms of support and all this other stuff. And then to be patient about the process of doing it, the back and forth. Okay, is it this? Try this. Let's train you on this and see if it works and tweak as we hear different needs and things like that. And so this approach came from working together, the Department of Health, the training TA team, and the individuals in the regions doing the work, okay? So we said community level prevention is that you want to impact social norms, right, using external factors. So the first thing was defining social norms. What we noticed were people sort of use that word, right? We're going to change social norms. And they say, okay, what does that mean? And like, the social norms, you know, the norms that are social, right? And when you want to impact the social norm, you have to be you have to be able to concretize, to be able to say, okay, what does it look like and what can we do to impact that, right? So the first thing we thought about was, okay, so social norms are what you think other people do and believe and what you think other people expect you to do and believe, right? And that impacts what you do and believe. So we went around and we talked to the regions and the individuals doing the work and asked them, okay, when you say social norms, what are you talking about? What are you trying to change, or what would you like to change? And then we looked at the literature research, and there was a bunch of stuff that's, you know, was listed as social norms that impact sexual violence. And what we did was we said, okay, together, based on what the regions, the individuals doing the work are telling us, and based on the literature, we came up with these 6, because this seemed to represent what they were thinking when they set social norms, okay? The next step is to be able to concretize it, because if I tell you healthy relationships, what does that mean? Go make people have healthy relationships. Like, you have to be able to envision that like you're watching a TV, right? You're watching TV and you get to see this is the behavior I don't want, or this is the behavior I do want, because in real life, that's what it is, it's behaviors, right? So we had to sort of take this concept, and if we say that social norms are what you do and believe, your thoughts and your actions, then let's dissect this and turn it into thoughts and actions, right? So what are the thoughts and behaviors that you want to decrease? That's decrease. That you want to decrease or see less of. And what are the thoughts and behaviors that you want to increase? So really start concretizing. Okay, we have these 6 ones, right? Now, with each of them, let's look at what are the thoughts and behaviors that you want to decrease and what are the thoughts and behaviors that you want to increase. So it becomes very not black and white, but very concrete, right? So bystander intervention. We want more people to think, oh, you know, they look uncomfortable, I should get some help. We want more people to think, when I see something, I am part of the solution, I should do something. We want people to have those thoughts, right? We want people to then do something different. We want them to ask someone, hey, are you okay? We want them to call someone. We want them to push a button. We want them to get involved, right? The thoughts and behaviors that we want to decrease is the kind of thinking, it's not my problem, I should mind my business. Or I don't want to be a snitch, right? Those are part of the thoughts that come out of a social norm. So those are the thoughts that we want to decrease. And then we want to decrease behaviors like walking away and looking away. We did the same thing with each and every one of the social norms that the regions had identified that they work with. So now they have this really concretized concept of what it is that they're trying to do. They're trying to increase these thoughts, they're trying to decrease those thoughts. Right? Make sense? Okay. And again, we went through the process. This was a grid I gave an example of that, right? For each of the social norms. And it was an activity where the regional center, the people sort of wrote out thoughts we want to increase, behaviors we want to increase, thoughts we want to decrease, behaviors we want to decrease, okay? So now the next step is, okay, how do you use community level approach to impact social norms? Well, how do social norms get created to begin with? Yeah, it's in the community, right? Mother's Day. What do you do for Mother's Day? Anyone tell me Mother's Day, what do you do for Mother's Day? You what? You give gifts. Who do you give the gifts to? Just everyone? You throw them out? To moms, right? Every mom. Oh, Mom, here. You give a gift, right? What else do you do for Mother's Day? You go out to eat by yourself? Mom, you take Mom and treat her, I imagine. You're like, Mom, pay for yourself, right? You treat her out to dinner. What else do you do? You celebrate her on social media. You put on a nice meme like no one like my mom, right? With a picture of someone who's beautiful or something, right? What else? You cook. You cook for Mom. You cook her a dinner. You say Happy Mother's Day. What else do you do? You send flowers. What else do you do? And a card. You gotta give a card, right? Do most of us do things like this? Why? Because it's not the same for Father's Day, by the way. Right? For Father's Day, it's like, here's a tie and a smile, right? Why? Where did we get this notion from? Where did we learn to do these behaviors? Hallmark, right? Commercials on TV that show all this, and you're like, oh, and Mom looks at you like, right? You got the idea you should do it, right? What else? From where? Where did you learn it? It wasn't like someone came up to you and said, this is a social norm and tradition in this country, right? I imagine that's not what happened. Did anyone tell you? So where did you learn it from? Your family. How? Your family told you? You watched your family do it, right? You watched your family do it. How else did you learn? You made cards. The teacher was like, it's Mother's Day. Here's what we're going to do. Right? So you saw it on TV. You saw your parents sort of do it. Your teacher said it. What else? You saw it on TV. Well, we saw it on commercials. Where else did you see it? On the billboards, right? In the grocery stores. Yes, in the grocery, the flowers. You get that message from everywhere. True or false? That's the way you learn norms. It's not like you saw it on one commercial and that was it. You were basically saturated or bombarded with ideas about what you should do and what you should think. What should you think for Mother's Day? Should you be like, oh, I got to give Mom a gift again? I gave it to her last year. I got to give it to her again? Is that what you think? What are you supposed to think for Mother's Day? I appreciate my mom. My mom is the best. I love her no matter what she did to me as a child, right? A Mother's Day is not the day to be like, I don't like my mom. So you got these messages from everywhere. That's the way norms are created, and that applies with all norms. I remember working in a community where the norm was this concept that men could not control their erections. It was, yeah. You know how I knew that? Because when a man cheated on a woman, guess who the woman got mad at? It's your fault. He was just standing there innocently. You passed by and ding. Right? Or other ways that you hear it on the movies. In the movies you see it. The man couldn't control himself. You hear it in the music. Right? Isn't that a certain message? Say that again. He couldn't help himself. Oh, no. You didn't hear me say that. You didn't hear me say that. Right? So the social norms, no matter what kind of social norm we're talking about, is implemented in the same way. So if we want to change it, what do you think we should do? use the same strategy. Use exactly the same strategy. So we have to develop a community level strategy. And the same idea, that it's focused, that it's multi-layered, where all these different approaches, all these different things are coming at people, giving exactly the same message about something, right? So first you want to be able to identify what's the social norm. Now the social norm, and I want to be clear about this, the social norm is not, do not rape people. You know, most cultures, most communities, most societies would tell you, no, we got that. It's not like they're going around, right? We got that. That's not the issue. It's these other things that we were talking about. So you have to be concrete about what's the social norm. You cannot hit all 6 social norms or all 10 social norms and have the same impact, right? It wasn't like you got messages about Mother's Day mixed with Father's Day, mixed with your brothers and sisters, mixed with the cat. It was all these messages about Mother's Day. Same idea. So pick 1 or 2 social norms, and then make sure that everything you're doing, and you're doing a multi-layered approach that sort of gives the message, keeps impacting that same social norm. And one thing we do know is saying the positive, what you want, the behavior that you want, and the thought that you want, as opposed to the behavior you don't want, and the thought you don't want, is more effective. If you focus on what you don't want, the message is that that's happening a lot, and then people are like, oh, it must be happening a lot, otherwise they wouldn't tell us not to do it, so it's okay for me to do it. Okay, so you want to focus on what you want. And all of them have it focused, multi-layer approach, synergy, where all the things are working together. All the things are working together. So, people, does that make sense? So in the region, we said the same thing. When we got together in New York State, we were like, that makes sense. Now we got to deal with all those challenges that we talked about, right? So how are we going to do this in a realistic way, given our reality? So the first thing was this whole issue of defining the community, and someone said it, right? Defining the community. If you're looking to change, if we have to do this multi-layered approach, that's going to take a lot of work. Is it fair for me to say that? And it's going to take human power, right? Like people, right? So if I'm in an agency and I only have 3 people working with me or 2 people working with me, and I'm trying to change all of New York State, I better not sleep, right? So rather than trying to do that, which is impossible and really challenging, we talked about this approach of defining the community. Let's narrow it down what we're focusing on, right? And so we went out and looked at what were people working on, and there was a couple of things: foster care, schools, nightlife, neighborhood, and at the end, we kind of told people, okay, you guys get to choose from various, and most people in the New York State area landed on either working on nightlife or school district. So the idea of the nightlife was a neighborhood, not one bar, but a downtown area with a bunch of bars. So the idea was, let's change the culture in this nightlife area. Let's change the culture in this school district, right? We start off with one bar, we start off with a school, but the idea is that we're going to change it in that whole area, right? The second thing was then looking at engaging decision makers. And actually, I'm going to take a step back before that. In order to do this work, working with the decision, you talked about skills, right, and the resources. Part of what we looked at was this idea of really leveraging the resources and the skills that you had. So if you think about it, you have relationships, true or false. In the individual work, these regions had amazing relationships. Amazing. They knew someone who was in the bar association. They knew someone who was working a good relationship with the school. They knew someone who was a principal. They knew someone who had, was in the neighborhood association or that bar owner. So they had these relationships. So the idea was, how can you leverage those relationships? How can you take advantage in a good way of those relationships? right? The other piece is leveraging the team that you have. So for example, on one team, they were very strategic about who would go out to the nightlife and talk to the owners. There was one person who was better at marketing and was better at sort of thinking strategically, because this takes a lot of strategic work, right? And the other, but she wasn't that great at talking to strangers. And it requires going out at night and hanging out in the bar a little bit. I would be good at that, right? Right? But this other person was. So let this other person do that. So it requires strategic thinking about who's doing what and how can we take advantage of the work we've been doing. It also requires strategic thinking about how do you get to the decision maker. First of all, you have to know the difference between a decision maker and a champion. What's the difference? Right? A bartender can be a champion. A health teacher can be a champion. They cannot make the decisions. Right? So you want to know the difference, and then you want to know, okay, how can I get to the decision maker, but you want to utilize your champions. Right? So we had training around how do you engage decision makers? How do you get to them? This whole thinking of how do you talk to people that are not interested in the work you're interested in? Do you think most bar owners are interested in sexual violence prevention? Not that they want it to happen in their bars, but they're interested in what? Making money. What else? How do they think they're going to make money? Selling drinks, making it sexy, fun. Right? They think if I make it fun, if I make it a good time, people are going to come in and I'm going to make more money. So when you go up to them and say sexual violence, that doesn't happen here. Right? So how do you identify strategically what are their interests, what do they want, and then from there, here's the connection. You want to make more money, here's the connection. You want it to be a fun place where people get loose, here's the connection. Right? So having conversations of helping people sort of think of how do you talk to them? How do you create a vision for the decision maker? And how do you sell not an intervention? Not to go in and do a training, because that's not community level prevention. How do you educate and sell the package? So in a bar, I don't want to come in and do a training. I want to come in and talk to you about the environment. I want to look at the hallway. I want to talk about how to make this safe, how to get people involved, do trainings, have posters. I want it to be multi-layered. Right? So we talked about that, and the ideas that a decision maker would be really key in making a decision about what they take from the menu. What are the different pieces? Okay. Anything I'm missing? Okay. So in implementing multi-layered approaches, we just want to review what some of those pieces might be. So a policy. So for example, if I want to implement a bystander, I want to talk about bystander norms, social norms. Right? What's the thoughts and behaviors that I want? Give me an example of a thought that I want to increase. Anybody? It's my responsibility to step up and help someone. I'm part of the solution. Right? What behavior do we want to see? Well, what does that mean? What does that look like on TV? So if I watched a television show and I was more proactive, I'm watching it and I'm on the show. I didn't say this makes sense. Okay. What would someone be doing on the TV show that shows me that they are more proactive? Asking someone if they need help. Calling someone, right? So now let's think of, kicking someone out that's not behaving properly, right? So let's think of policies now, right? All geared towards that. So a policy might be if someone is acting out or whatever, they get kicked out. A policy might be everyone gets trained on bystander intervention, right? So notice that it's all geared towards bystander because that's the norm we're focusing on, right? Evidence-based interventions. What evidence-based interventions can we do around bystander? Say that again. So you do an evidence-based intervention that teaches the 4 Ds. Bring in the bystander. What's the other one? Green dot, thank you. Right? And you do it, you strategically think about who you do it with. Right? For example, in a school, it was really interesting. There was a case where they were doing interventions with the students, and then the students left the classroom, and something happened outside in the hallway, and the teachers all acted like they had nothing to do with it. Right? So obviously, you have to do with staff as well. Right? So you have to do with everyone involved. Media. You can have posters up that talk about if you see something, do something. You can have signage up. And it doesn't have to, and here's the thing to think about. If you're doing it in a school, the school's interested in attendance, let's say, right? And grades. They also have a lot of interest in bullying, don't they? Right now? So you could do social media and signage around if you see something, say something, and help that principal see how it connects to bullying. Because it's going to have the same impact, even if they're not on board about the sexual violence. Does that make sense the way I'm saying it? Okay. Environmental interventions. So in a school, you might want to go and see where there's, if there are spaces where things happen. I was telling Catherine, I was joking with her, when I went to high school, there was a particular hallway that was kind of dark. So if you wanted to have a fight with someone or jump someone, that was the hallway to be in. And wait, with your friends, not by yourself, right? I was telling Catherine that's what I heard. But that was the spot you would pick a fight with someone. If you bothered me, I'm going to be there waiting for you. So if I'm doing an environmental intervention, I may look at the environment physically. Where might there be more of a risk of something? Where might we need to place a staff member to do bystander work? Right? Modeling behavior, so having the adults or staff or everyone, leadership, modeling the behavior, and then other activities. You can have auditorium class, workshops or different activities. PTA trainings, okay? And the idea is, again, that all of these multi-layered approach works towards the same thing. Okay, so we're going to set you up. I want you to think of an environment, a focused area. It could be a hospital. It could be schools. It could be bars. It could be church. It could be, this hotel. It could be hotels, right? Think of an area, and what we want you to do is to think of what would this multi-layered approach look like? What would this multi-layered approach look like? And what we're going to do, we want you to work in groups, like as a group, just come up with some ideas about what it might look like. And for you folks, in the end, we're going to give you a paper. You can put it on the wall, and perhaps you can clump up in groups. Is that okay? Okay. I think it'll be like 2 or 3 groups over there. Okay, we're going to just give you a couple of minutes. Now, you can draw it if you like drawing. If you're like me, you could do stick figures. It could be abstract art. You could write it. You could put symbols, however you want to represent this multi-layered approach. Ladies and gentlemen, if we can get your attention, please. If we can get your, I want to apologize for interrupting. I know there's some really interesting conversations going on. I know, I could hear it. Okay. So first, I want to know, what was it like to do this? Say that again? Challenging. What was challenging about it? Or what could be challenging? Say that, and I'm going to encourage people to use the mics. I'll repeat when I can, but I'm going to encourage people to use the mics, so I'll lose weight by coming over here.
A lot of cooks in the kitchen.
Yes, a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and that's a blessing, right? When you're doing community level work, that's what it's going to be like, right? Because it's a blessing. You want a lot of people involved, not 30 people, but you want more than just you. And it could be challenging because people have different ideas about what it's like. Yes.
I'll say I really liked the process. I thought you did it, like, I've been doing prevention with RPE in California for a while. But I thought the way and we're moving more community potentially, and so I thought really liked your framework of how to flush it out. Because I think that gets a lot of us scared, to be honest, and then really how to be focused on that. And this is a very concrete way of being focused, so I thought it was really easy to flow it out.
So what you're saying is that the concrete, being able to be more concrete makes it easier to actually start like strategizing about how you're going to do it and what it's going to look like, right? Nice. Others, yes.
And I was going to say that similarly too. We were struggling on, we're missing things, and it's going to take a lot more than this to put it in order, and reading between the lines. It's just a lot of structuring.
Yes. So that's a good thing. Because that means that's part of community level work. It's like really thinking strategically. So it's almost like envisioning what might this look like, and then start taking it apart and taking steps back. So what does that mean? What do we need to do? You could do that, Nene, is that the name of the dance? I'm old, I don't know. Okay, others. Yeah.
I think it was kind of fun. The folks that were from the community that we were conceptualizing were getting excited and creative about like, oh, what this could look like, and just hopeful about like seeing a space transformed. So I think it was hopeful and fun too.
I love that you said that, because one of the things is, so a lot of times people talk about going into the community and letting the community sort of decide what to do. And that's important, really important, and wonderful. And there's an and to it, right? If I go to the community and I just say, what do you want to do about sexual violence? They're like, we just want to tell us, we just say no. Okay. That may not be as effective, right? So it's almost like you need to train people or educate people about what are the things that are going to be, not this is the policy and this is the thing, but sort of like, almost like a Mother's Day example or whatever, this is the way to think about it, right? And then now they've got what they need to create and to come up with ideas. And that's what people find, is that once they understand it, now they can own it. They can take ownership, because now they come up with all these ideas that work together. So I'm so glad you said that, because that's something that I think the regions are really noticing. In New York State, we're really noticing. Yes?
It was too many cooks in the kitchen, but I don't cook chicken how you cook chicken. So even though we're all cooking in different ways and thinking about this in different ways, how beautiful will our chicken be? We put together all our ingredients.
Yes.
So we got to be open to how folks think different.
Yes. Yes, that's part of the beauty.
Or you're going to shut us down.
Or you got, exactly. So that's part of the facilitation of it, right? So here's the thing. If you're going to cook chicken, what do you need? Chicken. Right? So part of it is bringing to the table, we're going to do sexual violence prevention. Here's the things that I want you to know about what's effective, what's not. This community level, this multi-layered, all of us working in synergy. This is the idea. And now let's hear about how you cook chicken. Let's hear about what seasoning you put on it. Let's hear about, because that's the beauty of it, right? Something about having a lot of people to the table, one of the things we always recommend is to look at coalitions and working groups. And sometimes they're two different people or two different groups, right? I know I've been in coalitions, community groups that meet every month or every 2 weeks, and we sit around the table and we vent. We're like, girl, did you see this problem? Oh my God, what are we gonna do about that problem? Blah, 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 blah. And it's wonderful, and it's community building, it's relationship building, and there's no actions to it. Right? It's sort of like every month we come together, we talk, and we get inspired, and we leave, and we're like, oh, see you next month. Right? So what you want to do is there's a purpose for that group, and then you might want to invite some of those people to be in an action group, or you might want to turn that into an action group. But the idea is action. It's not just let's talk, get inspired, and leave. Right? And so part of the facilitation of that is being strategic and bringing those people that normally are not at the table to that table, right? Other things that you notice or in doing this, yes? go over here. Wait.
Well, we did it really practically, and someone used an example from their own work, a social norm that students often rely on peers and social media to find out information about sex and relationships. So we wanted to get at that norm, and we thought different strategies in order to do that, including creating spaces where students can learn that their parents actually have information that could benefit them and that they're not all ignorant and, don't know things. And just we have a whole bunch of them and they're written out really nicely with this great handwriting.
Nice. So 2 things. The social norm piece, being able to concretize it, I think is a huge part of it. So and you just named social norms around peer, right? Peer and using media. But then you honed in on one specific social norm that you wanted to promote. This idea that a thought that your parents may have some information that's useful, right? The adults. And the behavior is you may want to talk to them, right? So being able to be concrete about the social norm, like if you're just saying gender norms, I don't know what that means. I'm constantly telling people, if I see a TV, I see a movie on a TV, and someone is doing the gender norm that you want, what do I see? Or what do I hear them say in their head? You know, in some movies, they're like, oh, blah, 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 and this is what the person's thinking. What do I see them think? But the more concrete you are, the more strategic you're going to be about making sure that everything's in synergy. So I love that you said that. Others. I'm wondering if anyone would want to share some of their plans, especially when it's written in such beautiful handwriting. Would anyone like to share? Because I think we can get some really good ideas from each other. Let's start here. Someone can be, what's that? Anna White? What's Vanna White? Someone can be Vanna White. Okay.
So this is our lovely table. Hello, friends. So we identified the community as our school district, and then the norm was bystander intervention. So the idea of stepping in and helping somebody out and things like that. And so the policy, then we just broke down each of the different segments. So the policy, we did an award system for bystander intervention. So like have a nominate intervener of the week. And the situation that they stepped in on, those people would nominate them, and then they would select one person a week. And then that would also be highlighted on the social media, so that they can be highlighted on the Facebook page for the school that they're the intervener of the week. And then we did the EBP of like shifting boundaries in middle and high school, because it has a restorative justice piece, and then it has a mapping component. And then we added, we would adapt it to add bystander intervention, like add a component on that piece. And then we put up posters around the school as well, and then using the mapping to do some environmental changes and stuff like that. And then use some additional like training from Start Strong about like how to be an upstander for some of the adults and students. It's a term, yeah, for Futures Without Violence in their Start Strong curriculum, they call it an upstander instead of a bystander. So it's like how to step up, yeah.
And I love the way each of those pieces really reinforce the other one, right? Beautiful. Others, anyone else want to share? Anyone at all? I'm not going to pick any table that has beautiful handwriting or anything like that. Is there anyone that would like to share? Yes, Susie, you were saved by the bell. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that'd be great. So our goal was addressing some of the foundations for gaining consent, and we thought we should be looking at a middle school because that's when those social norms really start developing. And the decision makers we identified were the school board, principal, and PTA. And we didn't get quite to policy, but we thought we should start asking questions so that we could get our feet in the door and then find out if sex ed was something that was taught and who is teaching it. What are their current policies on harassment and bullying, and asking the principal how much time is spent with these issues and letting him know that we wanted to support some work with that, finding out if they had social emotional learning, and what are some of the current training for teachers and were there gaps, and was there an opportunity for us to do some bystander training for teachers in in some of the training that's currently going on? Did they have an orientation, and did the orientation address harassment and bullying? And then when we hopefully got into the school, we would have the students develop posters and social media addressing bullying and harassment, and then also seeing if they had a PBIS program, which is a positive behavior and intervention support system, and if we could bring in some of our lessons to, again, to tie this all together with their overall behavioral system.
Love it. Love it. And what I love about that, and we didn't say this, but when working with the decision maker, the first step is to figure out what's going on. The first step is to figure out what's going on, if they have policies, if they have, what are the norms, what do they see, what are they concerned about, what are their interests? If they have policies, is it communicated? A lot of people have something written on a paper. It looks really cute in some cubicle. Nobody knows it exists, right? So I love it because that's all the work that goes into working with the decision maker to develop collaboratively, right? Because they have to own it, this multi-layered approach. Beautiful. Okay, so give yourself a round of applause. So we have like 5 or 10 minutes? 10 minutes? So any questions? Questions, thoughts? Yes.
Can you talk a little about data collection and evaluation of community level strategies?
Sure. Do you want to talk about data collection?
So a lot of the interventions that the regional centers are using, we ask that they use evidence-based or evidence-informed. So a lot of them have the pre-post test. And then we do have our own RPE evaluation plan that includes some varying components of collecting data from the kind of work that they do, using a lot of qualitative data through their quarterly reports to identify some of the emerging themes. And because, like other states, other RPE states, the transition that we have moving towards community level prevention, just like someone had mentioned back there in the back of the room, that we are figuring out how we can explain this shift. So a lot of that is using a lot of qualitative data from the quarterly reports, from their a lot of the sessions that they do with the different communities that they work in, but mostly it is collecting individual level type data.
And the only thing that I would, not the only thing, but that I would add to that is one of the things that we're looking at is, first of all, a lot of this work is like strategic work, like you guys were talking about strategic thinking, and then figuring out how you're going to sort of address this, right? So how do you help people show that they're working, right? The other piece is a lot of organizations or that are getting funded, RPE money and things like that, are situated in an organization that's doing response work or that's doing presentations in the classroom. And so they're looking at the person who's sitting around doing strategic thinking and sort of going to the bars at night or whatever it is and saying, well, what are you doing, right? So helping, and this is something we're thinking about, we haven't done yet, but we've had like TA around it, but we're thinking about how we could better support the individuals doing the work in terms of how do you talk to the decision makers at their organizations, so that, you know, how do you explain the work? Do we need to do something around that? So really sort of that's sort of part of what we're thinking in terms of next step, because it's different type of work, and then, you know, we want to make sure that people don't think people are sitting around, right? Others, yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more, like, concrete what you do, what you did in New York to help make this happen? I just would love to hear some examples.
Okay. It's funny because we were saying, I don't think we gave a lot of examples. So a lot of it is around training and TA in terms of talking about or figuring out this process in a way that's realistic for folks. And then in terms of concrete examples of what has happened in the regions, for example, in Long Island, we have a Long Island person here, so I'm going to talk on their behalf. They did some work in the bars, and then they got earned media for it, right? So it was written up in the newspaper. And so now you have other nightlife arenas that are calling them and wanting to get involved. And that has also influenced another part of New York State. So that's an example. In the schools, there are people who are talking to the principals and saying, okay, what can we do in terms of establishing something? So for example, there was someone in New York City who had a relationship, an existing relationship already with the principal. And this is really interesting because it's talking about getting buy-in, right? So you go to the principal and you're like, we have this community level approach, and they're like, no, can you just do a training for the teachers? Okay, so you do a training for the teachers. She did one training on like sexual violence in general, and now she's doing another training on community level prevention. So she's educating the staff about what it is, and that's gonna help sort of then move towards that. So it's really looking for each piece, what are the concrete things we can do here with this strategic thinking, but it's like, okay, where are we, and what can we do to move to the next level? Anything you wanna?
Yeah, and I think just sort of in a general level, each region has identified a focus area, and I think we talked a lot about that's really important, is to hone in on your work instead of the work that we've decided to do is focus, not broad. So each region has identified a focus area, which, as Grisel said, was nightlife or the school community. And then on top of that, we've created work plans that have these multi-layered components. And it's not that they're all being implemented right now, but there's a plan in place and there's thinking around, right now we have this evidence-based intervention, we have policy work, we have a school that's done an MOU. So there's different things that they're working towards. So I think in general, kind of like an overall broad picture, and I would encourage anyone to talk to people from New York State. Nicole's here. We have people from across the region here. But yeah, it's kind of that approach and thinking about how to go through that strategically.
And the other thing is to be, like for every region, there are different places depending on what has happened, right? So it's interesting, one region was working with one a bar association, and there was a lot of interest, and then it started sort of dying out. So now they're sort of working on another one who expressed interest while they're still having that one. We use this language, which we think is not necessarily appropriate, but it's the way we're expressing it. Sort of like dating two regions at the two communities at the same time to see which one, right? Which one sort of gets ahead, and then we're going to go with that while we're still sort of encouraging this one, right? Sounds wrong, but okay. Other questions or comments? I have 1 minute, so one more question. Yes. You're it.
I just wanted to add to the data and evaluation. CalCasa did a great webinar a month or two ago about measuring change at the community level. Of course, understanding that if you have a community-based intervention, you can measure change at different levels of the socio-ecological model. But if you're interested specifically in that, I know there's a recording on their website.
And I also want to put a plug in for utilizing the toolkits, the different toolkits that the CDC has developed as well, because they have several that I think could be very useful in this work. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and your attention. Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you for listening to this Prevent Connect podcast. Prevent Connect is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, with funding from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views presented on Prevent Connect are not necessarily the views of the United States government, the CDC, or CalCasa. To learn more about Prevent Connect, visit www.preventconnect.org. For more information about CalCasa's mission, or to show your support, visit calcasa.org. That's CalCasa.org.